again, everybody, and welcome to this week's module. This week, we're going to be looking at developing forecasts. As we've moved through the course, we've looked at data as raw facts, and now we're going to be looking at how to extrapolate that data and convert it into useful information. If you recall, we looked at three basic buckets of information or analysis. We had descriptive analysis, which was sort of looking in the past, much like looking at an income statement. There was prescriptive analytics, which a good example of that would be an airline using historical data to try and come up with pricing for their seats to try and max out the capacity of their airplanes. In this module, we're going to be looking at predictive analytics. So we're going to be designing some forecast models. This is done by just about every organization or every business out there. It's also used by stockbrokers to try and determine stock prices that are coming up in the future. So we're going to be designing three different models. We're going to be using a moving average, then something that's called an exponential smoothing average, which more or less is sort of a sophisticated weighted average model that puts more emphasis on more recent data. And then finally, we're going to be using a linear model as well. Once we've constructed our forecast models, then we need to figure out or determine of these models that we've developed, which one is the most accurate, or which one is the least inaccurate, I should say. And we're going to apply something called a mean absolute deviation to determine which model of the ones that we constructed is the best fit that we would recommend. So if you look down, scroll down a little bit further in the page, you'll see a forecasting Excel worksheet. Please open that up, and I'm going to walk you through it, and let's get started. Okay, everybody, if you could just scroll down to the bottom of the page, and under the Do section, you'll see Forecasting and Planning Worksheet can be found here. And just click on the here to open up your worksheet. And this is what you should have, our Forecast Planning tab. So I'm going to spend just a moment reviewing what we have here and what the plan is, what we're going to do. So we can see our previous year's sales going from January to December. Each month is actually also referred to as a period number. Many companies, especially when their fiscal years don't operate on calendar years, refer to a specific month or time period as a period number. Then we have our previous year's sales by month, from January all the way to December. So this is what we sold last year. So we've now been tasked to make a forecast for the upcoming year. So we're going to do this by using four different models, two variations of a moving average. We're going to use an exponential moving average and a linear model as well. And once we create these models, we're then going to determine which one is the best fit, and that particular model will be the one that we will use for our budgets and to go forward. Okay? So the moving averages, actually, they're done quite simple. Nothing too complicated with the formulas there. Now, I want to mention for the time periods, like I've got a 2-month here and a 4-month there. You can do 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. It really doesn't matter. It really comes down to the length of time your forecast is running for and what you feel is most suitable. But for this exercise, we're going to stick to a 2-month and a 4-month. And all the moving average is, for example, our 2-month moving average. So our forecast then is going to start in March for period 3. Why? Well, because this number here, this forecast is going to be the average of last year's January and February. We're going to take the average of those 2 months, and that's what we're going to use for our forecast for period 3, March. So we can start by entering a formula equals average, AVR. You can find it in the drop-down. And then let's left-click on B10 and drag it over to C10. Put a closing parenthesis in there and hit Tab. Now, I want to just review something momentarily with you guys. I understand that everybody has different levels of experience and knowledge on Excel, so I just want I just want to review a couple of things with you to make sure we don't leave anybody behind. So in Excel, our columns going up and down are represented by letters, and then the rows going across are represented by numbers. So when you hear me make a reference, for example, of B10 and C10, well, column B, row 10. So I'm referring to that cell there, or C10 would be the one behind it. So now when we look at our formula here in D11, in other words, this is our 2-month moving average formula, and our first forecast period is March. We can go up here to our formula bar, and we can see that we entered equals average of B10 and C10, and that's the results that we've gotten, okay? Now, to drag this formula across the copy, we don't have to keep entering the formula over again. Once we've clicked and highlighted this cell, you'll notice down at the bottom right-hand corner, there's this little green square. You can just put your mouse or your cursor there, left click, hold it down, and then you can drag that formula across like this, all the way over, and then let go, okay? And it's copied that formula across. Now, one thing I want to point out, and I always say this, when you're dragging things and entering formulas into Excel, just because you get a number doesn't necessarily mean it's the right number. So I always like to make it a habit, and I encourage you to do this as well. When you're copying, dragging formulas around, when you get to the last cell, just click to highlight the cell and then look up here to your formula bar just to make sure that the formula that's there is what you were expecting. So if we look at this, we've got a formula, an average formula that's picking up the average of cell K10 and L10, which is October and November sales. So that's what we want, okay? So that worked out quite well. Now, the other thing I would encourage you to do as we work through this or any other spreadsheets and items in the course is I would encourage you, even after we're finished the session, to save your copy. Put it somewhere on your G drive or wherever you like to store your files safely, just so that you've got that to fall back on, because some of the formulas we're going to get in here are going to be a little bit involved. And when you're not using these every day, it's really simple to forget them. So I would encourage you to save your work. Okay, so now we're going to go down to the next. So that's it. That's how easy that was. We've created our 2-month moving average. We're going to create another moving average, and we're just going to do it for 4 months. So our first period where we're going to actually have our forecast is going to be in May, the 5th period. Why? Because this number is going to equal the average of last year's sales for January to April, right? We're going to take the average of those 4 months. Therefore, the first forecast goes in the following month. So it's the same formula. If you want to make sure that you're in cell F12 equals average. And then we're going to just click on B10, January's, drag it across to April, put in, whoops, what did I do there? Okay. Put in a closing parenthesis and tab, and we should have 91,575. If we look up to our address bar, we can see we've taken now the average of B10 to E10, which is, here's B, so that's January to E, which is April. That's our 4 months, so that worked out well. Again, all we need to do to copy this across is grab that little green square at the bottom, hold it down, and drag it over, okay? Now, we're going to get down to our, whoops, let's not forget our little habit that I mentioned we should do. We're going to take a look in the last cell here. We want to make sure that the formula here is what we're expecting. If you have a look, equals average, I10 and L10. So that's I, which is here, August, all the way to L, November. So it's picked up those 4 months. So we've got this done. We've got this set up correctly. So there's 2 of our forecast models created that quickly. So that wasn't too bad. Now, this exponential moving average, or is also known as an exponential smoothing average, is a little bit more involved. This particular forecast is like a sophisticated weighted average. In other words, the first thing we need to do when we're calculating an exponential smoothing average is we need to calculate the alpha, or the smoothing constant. So there's a formula that we do to do that, and it's simply 2 divided by n plus 1, okay? N being the number of periods, okay? So that's the formula, and we're going to put that right here. So we've got EMA, or alpha, or our smoothing constant, is going to be equal to 2 divided by n plus 1. Now the number of periods that we have, we can see we've got 12 periods here. So it's just going to be 2 over 13. If we were doing a forecast for 2 years, then it would just, 24 months, it would just be 2 over 25. And that's all we really need to for a formula to calculate to give us our alpha, or our smoothing constant. So let's put that in, equals 2 divided by, you can put 13. I'm just going to go correct form here, 12 plus 1. And what we're going to want to do here, we got a lot of numbers here. So guys, let's just go up to the top of Excel here. See where we've got the number category here. And this little blue arrow pointing to the right here, it says decrease decimal. Let's just click on that and let's just bring this down to 3 decimal places. Going, there we go. Okay, so we'll take it down so that our alpha, or our smoothing constant now, is actually 0.154. Now, I'm going to repeat that again, so you guys can see that. Okay, all right, so again, I'm going to enter in the formula, equals 2 divided by n plus 1, which is 12 plus 1, close brackets. That's all we're doing. And we've got all these decimals, all right? So once again, go up here to the top section. You can see in Excel, we've got clipboard, a font section, alignment, and then over here we've got number. And right up here, this little arrow, blue arrow pointing to the right, when you hover your mouse over that, it'll say decrease decimal places, and you can just click on that and just take it down to 3 decimal places so that you're left with 0.154. And that's our smoothing constant, okay? Now, our first period that we are going to forecast for when we're doing an exponential moving average is on the second period, okay? Because we have no data in the first period to put in there, okay? And because there's nothing there, the first period forecast in the exponential smoothing is quite simple. For this first period forecast, we're just going to use a plug number, and we're going to use the prior period's actual, okay? So in there, we're just going to have January's value of $99,500, and that's it. So whether you're doing a forecast using an exponential smoothing average of over 12 months or 36 months, it doesn't matter. Your first forecast is going to be in the second period, and it's going to be the actual value of the prior period. Okay, that's all you really need to remember for that. So now the fun begins. Now we're going to go over here to period 3, March, and here's where we're going to enter the formula. And if you recall from Canvas in this week's module up at the top, I put in the formula here for the exponential moving average, which is just the prior period plus the alpha, or the EMA, the smoothing constant, the thing that we calculated here, times the variance, or the difference between the prior period actual minus the prior period forecast, okay? That's a bit of a mouthful and thing to remember, so let's just key this in and take a look at it. So we're going to equals, and we're going to put in the prior period forecast, right, plus, now I want to make a point of something here. We're going to select this cell here, all right, which is our smoothing constant. But because Excel will by default, when we copy this formula across, it uses relative cell reference. So if we start to drag this formula across into December, this value that we've got in D5 is going to move over to E5, F5, and so on, and we're not going to get the right numbers. So what we need to do is we need to, in this portion of the formula, we need to lock that cell in place, and we use something called an absolute cell reference, which is simply done by putting a $sign, okay, just before the column letter D and just after it, okay? You can also hit the F4 key to get the same results as well. So putting that $sign before and after the D will make this an absolute cell reference. So when we drag this formula across, all the other cells will move across relative, but this cell, D5, will stay locked in place, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so we've got equals our prior period forecast plus our alpha, or our smoothing constant, times, okay, our open parenthesis, our prior period actual minus our prior period forecast, okay, and close parenthesis. So here's the formula you need to remember, okay? It's the prior, up here in the formula bar is your prior period forecast plus your smoothing constant, or your alpha, times the prior period actual minus the prior period forecast. And that's it, hit tab. And if you've done it correctly, you should have for March and cell E13 for exponential moving average, 97,169. And then we're just going to grab that, we're going to drag it across. And there we go. So our last cell, we're going to do the same thing. We want to check this. We've got a value here, a forecast of 89,887 for December. So let's just take a look up at our formula bar here for a minute and make sure that everything moved across the way that it was supposed to. So our formula is equal to L13, which is correct. That's our prior period forecast, plus D5. Great, that stayed locked in place. So our alpha, our smoothing constant, stayed locked in there, times L10 minus L13, which is our prior period actual minus our prior period forecast. Okay? Again, when you're finished with this exercise, save this because, you can always just click on a cell later and you can look at your formula and go, oh yeah, how did that go? And you've got that written down. Okay? All right, so that was the tough one. And the last model that we're going to work on is a linear model. Now, for the linear model, we need to determine what the X and Y values are. So we can use Excel to help us out here to save us a few steps in some math to do that. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a line chart and then we're going to use an options within Excel to have it display the values right on the chart. So that'll give us our X and Y values right up front. Okay. And if you click on your insert button here, you can see your charts show up here. And when we get to it, that's the line chart right up here we're going to select. So we need, in order to create the proper chart, we need two sets of variables. We need the period numbers, okay, across here. All right, on row 8, we need the period numbers, and we also need the previous year's sales down here. So there's a little bit of a play here on the keyboards because we need to highlight these variables, and they're not adjacent rows. So here's how we do that. Okay, so start by clicking in cell B8 to get the first period. Okay, hold it down. Okay, drag it across to highlight it. When you've done that, press and hold down the control key and don't take your finger off the control key. Okay, then you can move down and select B10, drag that across to highlight all the way to M10, and then you can let go of everything, and then you should have highlighted the values from B8 to M8 and also B10 to M10. If you've got those highlighted correctly, you can now begin to create your line chart. And we can do that by going up here, hit the drop down arrow, we'll select line chart. And your chart's right here. I'll just make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. Okay, so now that we've got our chart here, what we want to do is we want to click anywhere on the actual line that's showing the values. Let's just click anywhere on that line, and you'll see all the points now are all highlighted. All right, so we need to highlight all those points. Once you've done that, go over to the chart. You see here this little plus sign, and you'll see a little pop-up menu will come up that says Chart Elements. So let's select Chart Elements. This menu comes up, and we'll go down to almost the bottom where it says Tread Line right here. It's one from the bottom. And then we want to move over to the right to that arrow. Okay? And then we want to go down to this pop-up, and we're going to go all the way down here to More Options. Okay, this is where we want to be. All right, and then this menu will pop up. We want to drag this down, and you can see, guys, the second item from the bottom says Display Equation on Chart. Okay, so we'll select that, and now you can see that the X and Y values have displayed here. So we can now close this. And let's highlight those for a moment and drag them up here so we can see them. I'm just going to move my chart down. So we have a Y value, and I'm going to put the values right here in H5 and in X5. So in Y, the value, it's a negative value. Make sure you get your signs right. So it's negative 910.23. And the X value is 97137. Okay, so again, the X value is negative 910.23. And the X value is 97137. Once you've got those in there, you can just highlight your cell and you can chart and just delete it because we don't need it anymore. Okay. Now, once you've got your X and Y value, your Y and X values in here, now you're ready to begin to enter your formula. So with the linear, we're going to start right from the first period, January, and then we'll copy it all the way over to December. So the formula works a little bit different. Okay. So here's how we do the formula for the linear. Start with equals, and we want an open parenthesis, and we want to highlight the period number, not the month, right here. So we want to highlight B8, period number, and we're going to multiply that times the Y value here in H5. Now, we've got to do something similar here that we did with the exponential moving average, and that is we want to make the the Y value, both the Y and X value, absolute cell references, so that when we copy this formula across, the X and Y values will stay locked in place. Okay? So once again, to do that, you can hit F4 on your keyboard or any way that works for you, as long as you have a dollar sign in front and immediately after the column reference. Okay? So now we've got the period number times the Y value, and close the bracket, close the parenthesis rather, plus X, which is in cell J5. And again, we want to make it, whoops, what did I do here? J5, there we go. We want to make sure that we have an absolute cell reference. So we want a dollar sign in front of and behind the J. So let's just take a moment and check our formula now here. So for period 1, it's equals to B8, that's period 1, times the Y value in H5, and we've made that an absolute cell reference, close the parenthesis, plus X, which is in cell reference J5, and we made that a absolute value as well. Okay, and we'll hit Tab. And if you've done that correctly for January, you should have 96,227. Then we can just grab that small little green square at the bottom right-hand corner, left click, drag it across, and let go, and we've got it in place. Once again, guys, try and remember, let's check this last cell here in December, make sure we've got the expected formula. And we've got a formula of equals M8, which is period 12, that's what we want, times H5, great, it stayed locked on the Y value, plus J5, which is our X value. So there you go. Congratulations, you have just created 4 different forecasting models. And the next the next video, what we're going to do now is we are going to try and determine of these 4 models that we created, which one should we use? Which one, is going to closely represent our previous historic sales and be the one that we choose to use in our planning. Okay, so once again, in closing, please be sure, guys, to save your work somewhere, and this way, as a reference, you can always go back to your sheet. Gosh, how do we create that exponential smoothing average? I can just click on any of those cells. Okay, there it is, in case you haven't got it written down somewhere. And the same thing with the linear as well. Okay, so that's all we've got on this one, and we will see you on the next video.